The Beat with Ari Melber starts right now. Hi, Ari. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Thank you, Nicole. We begin with this late-breaking news. President-elect Trump is naming Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be his health secretary. This tees up another major clash in these new cabinet wars. This one between medical science and a notoriously unreliable political activist with no serious experience as a doctor or a federal government official. Kennedy's links here are more political than medical. That is kind of the first most important thing anyone should know if you're only catching up with this now. RFK Jr. ran an extremist and long-shot presidential campaign, which basically traded on his family's legacy name in a far-gone era of Democratic politics. And he traded that in to cozy up to Donald Trump after he dropped out of a race that was clearly unwinnable for many different reasons. Kennedy used his platform and fame to push discredited attacks on vaccines and other medical science. And let me be clear with you up front as we follow the facts together. Like other moves that Donald Trump, the president-elect, is making this week, this is exactly what he said he would do. Now, there may be some Republicans and independents and other Wall Street leaders who have kept claiming, even in public, even on the record, that they didn't expect this, or they didn't hear Trump, or it wouldn't be like this. But I want to be clear with you. Donald Trump vowed before Election Day that he was going to let RFK Jr., quote, go wild on health, fully knowing the fact-free and sometimes deceitful and lying and conspiracy theory-riddled rhetoric of RFK Jr. This is not a person who has distinguished himself in medical science or factual work or journalistic reporting about science. That's just not who he is or was. Now, like other Trump picks this week, the issue here is not exactly right or left, red or blue, or traditional debates over policy, which, of course, are a valid part of the shift anytime you have a new incoming government, especially when the parties change. This is something else, and we will continue to clearly, soberly, accurately, and calmly report on it for you. But we will also be clear and blunt in what's happening. This is, through President-elect Trump's choices, the very direct weakening and mocking of government posts by proposing to fill them with figures who are already publicly on the record opposing the very departments they seek to run and the very work of those departments. So you put someone anti-science who has been completely fact-checked by every major medical authority to allegedly oversee those same medical authorities. You put a partisan warrior in charge of a department where the main qualification is a nonpartisan administration of the law. Kennedy's baseless claims have included things like falsely saying Wi-Fi causes cancer. It does not. That it causes, quote, leaky brain, which is not a medical term. That school shootings are all caused by antidepressants, which is flatly false and can be, of course, discredited by any international comparison of the various issues. That chemicals in the water make children automatically transgender. No medical science supports the water link theory there, if you want to call it a theory. And he has said, again, not a doctor, not a scientist, but he is out here getting ready to try to take over control of some of these agencies that are related. He has claimed, quote, AIDS may not be caused by HIV. The falsehoods continue.
There's 25% of Americans who believe that they know somebody who was killed by a COVID vaccine.
Killed?
Killed. 25% of Americans.
You would seek to ban fluoride in the U.S. water supply?
I think fluoride is on its way out. I knew in May of 2020 that the vaccines were not going to protect against transmission because I was actually reading the monkey studies. They asked me why I wasn't wearing a mask. They said, wasn't I scared of dying of COVID? And I said to them, there's a lot worse things than dying. And they said to me, like what? And I said, like living like a slave.
This affects you. This affects your safety. If you have family, older, younger, parents, children, this affects their safety. If you are the more informed person in your community, then you will be someone who can do something positive, citizen to citizen, person to person, parent to parent, dealing with what will come out of this. And again, I want to be clear and I want to repeat it. This is not an ideological thing. We've covered the debates over lockdowns on this program. There were reasons that different government policies ran into different opposition over time, and you debate that out respectfully. There are valid differences of opinion on those policy matters. What you just heard there and what I just showed you about many false statements about science and medicine, armed with government power, is dangerous. This is not just about whether you look at something online and find it false or laugh it off. We are talking about the administrative federal powers over medicine, hospitals, nurses, science. The Centers for Disease Control chief has already warned prior to today's news that RFK's misinformation from a place of power is dangerous to the public. The concern about RFK potentially getting through the Senate confirmation process, once unthinkable, by the way, is roiling the FDA, current and former health officials, and others trying to make sense of this. When RFK Jr. ran for president, more of this was on display. And as I've mentioned to you on this program, we try to give you the news and the facts and bring people on to discuss it. So it's not about censoring or disappearing things. And so we took time out to have a taped interview with RFK Jr. and discuss many issues with him. One of the things that came across then, when he claimed to be an independent candidate, but also was cozying up to Trump, was the mix of outright combativeness that he has for really the way a lot of these things work in the government, the way medical science and doctors and other people who sometimes risk their lives in hospitals take care of people, the kind of vitriol he had for them, and an intense confidence about everything that he wanted to do, and later he said Trump would let him do.
I've litigated against almost every one of the major federal agencies. I've sued CDC, NIH, EPA, FDA, USDA. So I'm going to issue an executive order that any government official that lies to the American public in conjunction with his federal duties will be dismissed. And I'm going to issue an executive order stopping the intelligence agencies from propagandizing the American public.
That's who Trump is proposing to be in charge of these things. And in the Orwellian nature of people lying and then accusing others of lies, notice how he's proposing to control things. RFK Jr., in his statement there, his own words, would be the person in charge of what is true and a lie. And then the people who didn't agree with his truth about science or his suppositions about how HIV and AIDS work or leaky brain, then he says he would use government power to fire, to oust, to purge all those people. This is not a drill. These selections this week by President-elect Trump are quickly undercutting the pre-election claims that we heard from Republicans and certain conservative GOP apologists who were arguing that a Trump second term would be a way to advance competent conservative policy. False. Or it would be a way to move on from Trump's more extreme vows in campaign season once the campaign was over. False, based on the personnel decisions we are getting tonight. It is precisely the opposite. Just as Trump promised, these picks for these important posts, we are talking about the Pentagon and the Justice Department and the hospital oversight around the entire country. Just as he promised, these picks attack the foundation of competent, independent government. These are picks that are quite obviously and deliberately, and for him, unsurprisingly, sending out the shockwaves because these are people who are inexperienced, partisan, and again, as respectfully as I can say it, quite fringe and outlandish. The repercussions are in the real world, from hospitals to battlefields around the world, to how prosecutors will approach the citizenry when the Trump administration lawfully accepts these powers January 20th. Take the Attorney General nominee, Matt Gaetz. His vows to abuse power in order to attack Trump and perhaps his own enemies, that can cause as much pain on Wall Street as on K Street in D.C. And so let me show you something right now. The same conservatives who publicly and loudly rooted Donald Trump on over at the Wall Street Journal's conservative opinion section, now on this matter, they already have second thoughts, coming out against Gaetz, opposing him for Attorney General, saying he's a nominee only for those who want law used for political revenge, and it won't end well. These Wall Street conservatives are correct that Gates has vowed such revenge. That's not in dispute. We still live in a factual world, and that is the fact. But knowing that Gates has vowed such revenge doesn't separate the Wall Street Journal or these other Trump supporters from the fact that their candidate Trump also has vowed such revenge quite clearly and repeatedly. This is the feature, not a glitch. Now, there are Republicans who clearly view Gates as a particularly bad, politically vulnerable version of carrying out that plan, but it is the plan. Going into a vetting of Gates or trying to even stop him from becoming this official, running DOJ, if Republicans find the votes to do that, that could send a message about some kind of line. But the rule of law will require more than simply stopping a personnel decision like Matt Gaetz. It will have to stop President-elect Trump's unlawful demands. And anyone who knows anything about history and autocracy, and Rachel and Nicole, my colleagues, were discussing this just in the last few hours, knows that you can start that battle when you meet it, or you can wait around and when you're forced into it, face it in an even weaker condition. Trump's own allies say that he passed on AG candidates who were acting like they were applying for some kind of, quote, judicial appointment, said clearly with derision. Quote, they talked about their vaunted legal theories and constitutional bull. One insider told the Bulwark. Matt Gaetz was the only one who said, yeah, I'll go over there and start cutting effing heads. Former Congressman Gaetz' public record includes demands to hijack the government and abuse DOJ powers for what has always been, and unless the Supreme Court makes another change in the law, what is still today the abuse of government authority for unlawful retribution vendettas.
Republicans are in the majority, and I have subpoena power. I will personally investigate BLM like I'm a Soros-funded prosecutor going after the Trump organization.
We're proud of the work that we did on January 6th to make legitimate arguments about election integrity.
I've made it a living hell for the swamp rats, and many of them are retiring now.
We are going to go after this administrative state, and we're going to start at the Department of Justice and the FBI.
We either get this government back on our side, or we defund and get rid of, abolish the FBI, CDC, ATF, DOJ, every last one of them.
Abolish the DOJ, says the person that Donald Trump is proposing to now run the DOJ. And remember, before you even get into these potentially Washington conversations about former prosecutors or abuse of power and going after your opponents, all of which must be dealt with seriously, you also would be abolishing the Justice Department that does all financial crime, national security, violence against women, 93 U.S. attorneys around the country that enforce federal laws to keep people safe. The competent agenda of dealing with crime in America by either party cannot continue with someone who advocates abolishing the entire DOJ. And if you're saying, well, he couldn't have meant that, if someone's saying that, listen to yourself. You sound like the Wall Street people who said that about Trump, and I showed you 3 minutes ago. He meant it. He means it. Matt Gaetz has confessed this agenda in advance, and Trump likes that. Other MAGA travelers are afraid, apparently, that at least admitting all this so directly is a bad strategy, at least on the tactical or optical level. Figures who have tried to give Donald Trump everything he's asked for in politics, like Ted Cruz, that's been his mission since he lost to Trump in their first primary, even Cruz publicly pushing back on a, quote, surprising pick.
As for that particular nomination, look, we have a process under the Constitution where the Senate provides advice and consent, and I trust that process. That nominee, like every other, will have a vigorous vetting, will have confirmation hearings, and every nominee is going to be judged on the merits. I will say that was a pick that was, I think, very surprising to the entirety of the Senate, and so we'll assess the nominee on the merits.
Ted Cruz says it was surprising to the entirety of the Senate. That means whether you believe him or not, for whatever reason, today he thinks it's in his political interest to say the whole Senate, 100 senators in both parties, find that surprising. Surprising is a code word for bad. But again, Ted Cruz has followed and supported everything Donald Trump has said he's wanted to do, including politicizing the Justice Department or abusing its powers. So we are witnessing through these shock waves a little bit of a sussing out of what's going on. The people who supported and said they supported Donald Trump's agenda are concerned that he's appointed someone who actually publicly admits he will fully go forward with that agenda. There are sources telling NBC that both Gates and J.D. Vance are calling around to try to get Senate Republican support. It is hard to imagine back in Donald Trump's first term that Republicans would even give a hearing to fringe nominees like Gates or RFK. Now they're debating over whether they can get to 51 votes. And today's Republicans are also, many of them, not saying what I just showed you from Cruz. Some are admitting they want to be complete rubber stamps or even help Donald Trump twist the rules to ram all his nominees into power without their own Senate having any say. Now imagine spending your career trying to become a senator. So then you come into office, and this month, right now, you say you're going to take Donald Trump's orders to cut out your Senate vote. That your whole mission is to cancel out any say you might have had and been elected to have. That is bizarre. It is, by the way, against the constitutional structure. And it's also oddly self-enfeebling, impotent, a choice of political impotence. I say that by way of introduction to both the headline I showed you, where many people who wanted to be the Republican Senate leader were going along with that, or here's an Alabama Republican publicly saying the Senate should sit out of its constitutional advise and consent role, just find 51 votes for anyone Trump wants.
He deserves a team around him that he wants. It's not us to determine that. We've got 53 votes in the Senate. We can confirm with 51. I've already seen where a couple of them says, I'm not voting for him. Wait a minute. You are not the United States of America. You have one vote in the U.S. Senate. You did not get elected president. Vote with President Trump. If you want to get in the way, fine. But we're going to try to get you out of the Senate, too, if you try to do that.
Again, the Senate is a co-equal branch of government. That's what the whole voting is about. And you have someone there saying and admitting quite publicly he views his entire vote, and he says that votes of the entire Republican Party, as under someone else's control. That's not co-equal democracy. That is a symbolic sort of late-stage dying Senate, at least under one-party control, that does whatever the president says. It is not a recipe for a co-equal constitutional government. It's also historically not usually a recipe for competent oversight or monitoring how things are done and done effectively. Then there's Gates' role in a current House ethics probe that's reviewing allegations regarding sexual misconduct and drugs. He was also facing a federal criminal investigation of this, where he was not charged, we should note, and he denied all wrongdoing. Now, Gates may not be confirmed for this job. We don't know. But he's already done something unusual in resigning his current job in Congress. That was last night. There are reports that one motivation could be to try to circumvent the release of the material in that ethics probe I just showed you. Democrats saying that report must still be reviewed to vet Gates as a nominee.
The timing of his resignation and flight with President-elect Donald Trump suggests he believes that this report is not friendly and favorable. So I want to read the report and find out what the investigation behind it brought out.
Senator Durbin there, a big Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, speaking about just that one piece of all this, what the pending evidence or material is that was a big enough deal to put Gates in this ethics probe in the House. Remember, before that's even been resolved, he is up for one of the biggest promotions you could ever get. So those who said, don't worry, it'll be different, Trump's second term, why is everyone talking about democracy so much? Is this all overstated? Does Trump really want to purge generals, which a draft statement proposed? Does he really want to take over the DOJ? It's all here now. We have two very special guests. I'm back with you in just 90 seconds.
Look, Gates won't get confirmed. Everybody knows that.
You say Gates will not be confirmed. Why bother with the nomination then?
You can talk to the president, but it's a good. It's
How
a good,
are you reading
It's a good deflection from others.
Former Speaker McCarthy discussing about whether Gates would get this confirmation. We're joined now by Howard Dean, the former DNC chair and a doctor, as we discuss some of those issues, and a former governor, and Leslie Caldwell, former Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of DOJ. I want to get into everything we just discussed. We also have some more news coming down the pike, but we could start anywhere on the names. Doctor and Governor Dean, your thoughts on RFK Jr.?
He's obviously not qualified because his beliefs are far outside the mainstream of medical science. On the other hand, we've suffered through other HHS people who've been incompetent. And so I don't think he presents nearly the danger. Plus, the states have a lot to say about public health. I don't think he presents the danger that somebody like Matt Gaetz does.
Go on.
What do you want me to talk about, Matt Gaetz?
Gaetz, sure.
I've been thinking a lot about this because we've seen 4 appointees, none of whom are terribly impressive, to be polite about it. And my guess, he's flooding the zone. He's going to put all his outrageous appointees, none of whom should be confirmed, in there and figure the Senate's going to have to confirm somebody. And they are. There are some sober-minded senators, but most of them don't have a lot of courage. Maybe there's some who did. Mitt Romney is gone. He certainly did. We don't know much about John Thune out here in the boondocks, but they know about him in the Senate. And from a television point of view, he's the right guy to get. And I say that as a Democrat. Somebody's going to have to draw a line here on things like issues like national security. And there are people in the Senate who are on the Republican side who do care about national security. So this puts them in the position of having to defy Trump if they want to stand up for national security. So I think maybe he's just putting out these really outrageous appointments out there, figuring, okay, they can turn 1 or 2 of them down, but they don't dare turn them all down.
Leslie, you have tremendous experience. We've relied on you repeatedly. We've talked about nonpartisan tradition at DOJ. Your view of Gates's history, his qualifications, and what would happen if someone like him was running the DOJ?
I think even before you get to the fact that his name is Matt Gaetz, he's completely unqualified. He's hardly practiced law at all. He has never worked at anything like DOJ, either a state or federal prosecutor's office. He's never been a judge. The tradition of attorneys general is to choose, for the most part, experienced, respected, wise people for that role. Some are better, some have been better than others, but there's been no one like him who would have difficulty getting a job as an entry-level assistant U.S. attorney in anywhere in the country. I think then when you add on the fact that his name is Matt Gaetz and he's said and done the things he said and done, that makes him even less qualified and completely inappropriate for that role. The only thing that he's being chosen for, I'll defer to Dr. Dean for the political expertise and strategy, but the only reason to put somebody like that in charge of DOJ is to essentially destroy DOJ. And that's, obviously I have strong feelings about that, but that's something that would be devastating for the entire country.
Yeah, and you've served admirably, as we know, and dealt with a lot of serious cases over there and have that record to speak on. We have this other news I wanted to bring in, which is all related, and our guests might be learning about this as we are breaking it. But President-elect Trump is saying that he wants to put forward Todd Blanche, who was his personal defense attorney, in the role right behind what he proposes for Gaetz as Deputy Attorney General. That's the second highest position in the Justice Department. Blanche does have legal experience in court, unlike Gaetz, but certainly not of the traditional kind you would look at in that role. He dealt with Donald Trump's criminal defense in New York, including in the New York case that he lost. The sentencing on that has been delayed given the incoming administration, and that'll be worked out. Another personal defense attorney for Donald Trump, who handled some of that Supreme Court argument, John Sauer, proposed for Solicitor General. He, of course, dealt with the immunity case, also making those notorious SEAL Team 6 defense arguments, which we'll get to in a second. But Leslie, your view of that kind of figure, a criminal defense attorney being Deputy Attorney General?
So I think that, there's nothing inherently wrong with the president nominating an attorney who he's worked with in the past for one of those roles. But the nature of the representations, I think, makes it very, very inappropriate. I don't know how the Senate will react to that. I mean, as you noted, at least those two lawyers have significant legal experience. and prosecutorial experience and defense experience. And I think that's, they're real lawyers. But I think that the question is, should Donald Trump be appointing people who have represented him in such high profile, controversial cases? And I think that the Senate is going to be very much tested by all these nominations, obviously, particularly Gates, but I think the others as well.
Well, and putting both of these forward this week, Leslie, seems to show that President-elect Trump is very focused on DOJ and has a very clear idea for anyone who said, oh, as McCarthy did, well, Gates could go to the side or this is a strategy. Now you have his view of the top two picks, and they're both people who are personally and legally tied up in what he calls his own past persecution and what he's vowed to do about it.
Yeah, and I think another thing that people should pay attention to is the Department of Justice is a huge organization. It's not as big as some of the others that he's nominating people for, but it has over 115,000 employees. They do a lot of different things. Matt Gaetz has no prior managerial or leadership experience, as far as I know. I mean, I know he's on some committees in Congress, but he's not somebody who's ever managed a big organization or run an organization. So he's lacking that credential as well. And I don't know about the leadership or management experience of the other two. I think one of them has some led an office in I want to say Missouri, but I could have that wrong. But I think that's really important. I mean, you see the department has a lot of moving parts, and the AG and the deputy AG have to have their eyes on all of those parts. And it's a very difficult job, and it's not for somebody who's never even cut their teeth on a leadership role and who's never actually even really practiced law.
Right, which again speaks to what we've been reporting, what the goals are there, and they may not be about actually running the law enforcement for the whole country or the DOJ. It may be a very different brief based on what Trump has publicly said he wants as president-elect. Leslie and Howard, thanks to both of you. We're juggling a lot of stories, including those new developments, and we also have live coming up one of the Democrats in the House talking about the road ahead. Stay with me. We know, amidst everything we've been covering tonight and what President-elect Trump is planning, that Democrats are also looking for some answers. There have been many theories about what happened.
The economics here is really important.
Had President Biden not announced, to try to get reelected.
When you're in a country that wants something different, you got to give them something different.
If you voted for Donald Trump and voted Democratic down ballot, I would really love to hear from you.
Stop with the virtue signaling.
Illegal immigration and inflation. Those were the two killer issues for Democrats.
Campaign change, and where people made it clear that they want to change.
This is a conversation that will continue. Indeed, it is essential for any party losing, even what has been a narrower mandate, something we've been keeping an eye on. But turnout was a problem for the Democrats. The Times reported that counties with the biggest Democratic victories last time had about 1.9 million fewer votes this time. And Democrats did have a big ground operation. In fact, it worked. But something important is it can also obscure part of the Democrats' larger challenge. Consider how the Times wrote that the race was actually closer in Pennsylvania and swing states than in states where there was no active campaigning. This matters and speaks to what happened. Pennsylvania is a swing state because both candidates were able to do well there. Trump had decent support there. Last week, he actually improved in that state by about 3 points. The tough news, though, for Democrats that this article points out is if you compare that 3 points difference for Trump in a place where everyone was campaigning to blue strongholds like New York and New Jersey, remember, we've now learned that Trump did about points better there. Then if you look at the demographics, Trump did better overall with men and women, with voters of different racial groups, with the young, with the other groups of people 30 to 44, not quite the youngest voters, but not a place where Republicans have always shined, and then Gen X. Some are calling it the end of the Obama coalition. One Democratic lawmaker has been making waves with a type of warning, saying Trump has no greater friend than the far left. That is